with Avengers Endgame approaching, I thought it would be a good idea to look back at the previous Marvel movies that we've seen that tells the whole narrative of what is now known as the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Yes, that's right. So I started to rewatch the older films, a choice selection of the older films, and that's because I don't have all the films. Some of them, I don't know, maybe I'll get them, but I notice the price doesn't really come down with those, at least brand new. I mean, you can get, used copies on eBay and stuff like that, and get a cheap deal there. But boy, at Walmart, I don't know, all the other movies come down in price, but not those. But anyway, so there's some movies that I intend to get. I don't have all the Iron Man movies. I thought I had at least Iron Man 2, but all I had was the first one. And the Guardians of the Galaxy, I was never wowed by those, and I don't know. And Captain Marvel, I'm probably never going to buy that one. But anyway, so Iron Man. Rewatched that, and Iron Man, it didn't change my opinion at all, having not seen it in a while. But Iron Man sets a standard by which all other superhero movies could learn from and follow, of a template, especially when you're introducing your superhero. And when it's based on previous material, if you're doing something brand new, well, that's a different matter. But here, where it stays immediately, it checks off that box. Does it respect its source material? Yes, it does. The tweaks are obvious, done for obvious reasons, whereas originally Tony Stark gets shot down in Vietnam. It just says a Southeast Asian country. Well, you knew what it was. And if same thing, a warlord gets hold of him and demands he makes weapons for him. And of course, he ends up making the first Iron Man suit. And he has help from another prisoner who ends up dying trying to keep Tony safe while he activates his Iron Man suit. And so that's pretty much, it's all there. And of course, the character development, the hero's journey for Tony Stark is for him to go from this privileged arrogant a-hole guy he's just basically having a good time, and he's selling these super weapons, and hey, it's great, it's bringing in the money, and I'm sleeping with all these hot chicks, and good times. And then he gets spanked pretty hard and is broken, humiliated, and crushed, and put through something really horrible. And of course, he befriends this doctor in there who saves his life, and he grows to care about this man, and then he has to watch him die. And so this is when he transforms. It's not just he builds the suit. It's already established he's this genius tech guy who can build these things, and he does it. And but the transformation is in that moment where he's broken and beaten down, and discovers that his own weapons is being used by the enemy as well. And it's a situation of the guilt that he helped create this scenario that he's now being tormented in, and along with the doctor who's killed, and so on and so forth. And so there you go. When he emerges from the cave, the new Tony Stark, who is Iron Man now, is born. And that's classic superheroic story, especially with an origin story. And when done well like that, and when you show this transformation emotionally as well as the physical transformation, you can bring your audience in, because a lot of people, well, they're sick of origin stories, especially when they know them. Like, it's a hard thing for Batman and Superman. We've seen those how many times and stuff like that. Iron Man was new as far as the movie audience goes, because unless you were a hardcore comic book fan, I didn't know a whole lot about him, if anything. And so, but man, what a story to pick to introduce their movie version of Marvel on that in that situation, where here comes Iron Man, and it's the perfect little transformative story, in where he comes from so high and is brought so low, and then climbs himself even higher than he was before. Certainly much more noble man than he was in the beginning. And so the rest of the story, of course, you get the adventure, you find out he was betrayed, and the real enemy, and all that sort of thing. But of course, while watching it, and I've heard this going through this, oh, you couldn't make Iron Man today. And of course, why? Well, he's a straight white man. He's rich. He builds weapons for the government. Of course, he changes that because he's, he doesn't like doing that anymore. But he attacks and brutalizes Afghan terrorists. And they're all people of color. Oh no, you can't show that. Even though that's what was happening. So you got all that, even though it throws it in, the real enemy turned out to be his own corporate partner, and so on. It was manipulating everything, but still, well, he's pretty fast and loose with the women. Oh my goodness, you can't have that, and so on and so forth. And he ends up saving the girl. Well, you can't have men doing that. That's demeaning to women these days. So there's all those things, and without Iron Man, there is no Marvel Cinematic Universe. So this movie had to be good, and it was, and it had to reach and grab that audience, and plus give them that first stinger you get. Holy crap, there's Nick Fury. It's a shared universe, and here we go, it's on. And so that was a great moment, and it sealed the deal, and it made what happened possible, to where the idea of the shared universe, like never before, was unfolding right in front of you, right then and right there. And Iron Man did it. And so all these people, you couldn't make it. Does that mean you couldn't because you're an idiot? But everything else that's done is built on the foundation laid by that movie. And of course, the spectacular performance by Robert Downey Jr. And sometimes you would think that by now, even with the money, he probably would have moved on by, and all that sort of thing. But I think there's a lot of that. He understands that Iron Man also saved his life, because his career was in a very bad spot after his battle with addiction, and he managed to claw back. Probably the most spectacular story I've ever seen for someone that and that serious problem he had, and he does all that. So even that it gives some amount of push. Just even though it's rather outside of the movie, but so all of that is there, and it's an astounding achievement. And it's kind of sad to see where MCU is going now, but anyway, Iron Man did the deal and began what we all know and love today. Well, for the time being, the MCU. Now, not long after that, the other movie that they did came along, which was The Incredible Hulk. Now, The Incredible Hulk is also an interesting way of handling the origin story when you're tired of it. The thing about The Incredible Hulk is that it wasn't that long ago that you had the, who was it, Ang Lee's version of the Hulk. And there were some interesting things about it, but on the most part, it didn't do very well, and people weren't that thrilled about it. And so now they do this new Hulk who's going to be within this shared universe, it's already established by Iron Man. And so in here, how do you deal with the origin story? Well, they just put it in the opening credits. And I think that's something other movies should look to. When you don't want to, when you're reintroducing a character, if they're going to do this Batman thing, they could show the opening credits that details it, and that's it. And it's just music and stuff, and you know what it is. And you move forward. And that's how they did it, and it worked perfectly. And of course, there was a lot of tributes to the Bill Bixby Show, and that was all cool. And Lou Ferrigno makes a cameo, and they even make Bill Bixby appears from his old Eddie's Father show. And then there's Jack McGee is a student at the college where Betty worked. So a little thing, and then the music, they played that too. So, and then of course the whole Man on the Run type story deal for Bruce Banner. And all that's very well good. It didn't do as well as Iron Man, and so it was largely seen as kind of a lackluster or even a failure. And I'm not sure why, as I think it's a fine film. It holds up. I really enjoyed rewatching it. And it's kind of sad that whole story that was established there never really gets resolved. We see General Ross appear in the Avengers movies and Captain America and stuff like that. But that's about it. Betty, what happened? We don't know. It could have been recasted and all that, but instead they slapped on this romance with Black Widow, which it doesn't work. It was really kind of bad that they did that. But not everything is perfect in MCU. No, it's not. And we'll get there. But the Hulk, I thought, did a fairly good job there. Now, some of the CGI, of course, doesn't hold up. And the Abomination really is an abomination. I kind of wish they had made him look more like the comic book character, which this version of him doesn't look anything like it. But you had your Titanic battle at the end, and that wraps up the film. And unfortunately, another detail is that you seem to be being introduced to the man who would become another Hulk villain, the Leader. And I guess we'll never see that, because they figured the lackluster performance on The Incredible Hulk wasn't good enough, and plus they still share the rights with Universal Pictures. So they figure it's better to just go ahead and use him as part of the Avengers movies and that sort of thing, rather than have him in his own movie and have to share a substantial chunk with Universal on that type of version, I think, anyway. But the Hulk presents, again, the character development, even though the origin has already happened, but it's the story of Banner's struggle and his isolation and his desire and his love for Betty, which is kind of strange that when they it's just completely forgotten. But I mean, he's doing an awful lot in the hopes that he could finally get back to her, and it's rather tragic that he probably can't. And dealing with the Hulk and all that, and in some instances it seems kind of silly at the end. That might be one of the weaker parts, that he just sort of, and he seems kind of happy with the idea that he might turn into the Hulk, and it's like, well, I don't think so. It still torments him. But it did reveal, after seeing the Abomination, he realizes the Hulk is not as much of a monster as it could be, and it's because he's the better man. And so all that comes through, and you get a cohesive and solid story here, as opposed to some recent efforts. So Iron Man and the Hulk, maybe the Hulk didn't do as well as Iron Man, but they both still established the whole damn thing of the MCU, because yes, once again, another surprise stinger. Tony Stark shows up to visit General Thunderbolt Ross sitting in a bar getting drunk after everything that happened. And mentions, we're building a team. Oh, what's the team? Well, we know it's going to be the Avengers. But even at that point, you kind of wondered, did he already know about Captain America, which will be the next film that I will talk about. But with Captain America, people would have known the story about how he disappeared in World War II and all that. But then at some point they find his body frozen in the ice, and you see the scene there where Nick Fury, confronts him at the end and tells him what happened. And I kind of wondered if there was any establishment of the timeline there. When did that take place? And in Times Square. And does Tony Stark already know this story? And I'm not entirely certain, or what he knew. But he did know that Nick Fury wanted to form a team of special people. And as far as Tony Stark knew, he wouldn't have known that of any others, except, I guess, maybe Hawkeye and Black Widow at that point. But anyway, it's just an interesting little side note. But there you go. That's what started the whole thing. As astounding as that is, and it's sort of hard to believe, because it could have gone so wrong and just not worked out at all. And yet it did. And when you consider the position that Marvel itself was, that they had to build that studio up from nothing. They came out of bankruptcy as a publisher. And then they had to get the money. They licensed out characters for other studios, which, in the long run kind of cost them. They lost the X-Men, they lost Spider-Man, and Fantastic Four, and so forth. But what they had left, they managed to build this movie studio out of this bold idea, and it paid off. And then they were able to sell to the big daddy Disney, which brought in the big money. And for better or worse, and maybe in the long run it could be worse. I don't know what's going on there and what kind of weird disease has infected Hollywood. But anyway, even if it goes bad, that 10 years is pretty damn good for such an ambitious project, and they most certainly pulled it off. And you can't take that away. So there you go. Iron Man and Hulk started it off for the MCU. Thank you for watching and listening Please like and subscribe, and for those of you who have already subscribed, thank you very much. It does warm my heart. And while you're here, why not check out that link description below? That'll take you to my many stores that have plenty of goodies for you. Yes, that's right, you.